Every week, a lot happens in Parliament. Debates rage, bills are discussed, and laws are introduced. So it's easy to feel like you don't quite know what's going on in the chamber. So we're lifting the lid and telling you exactly what happened this week in Parliament. This week, we saw statements made on the death of the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip, a 10-minute rule motion on NHS pay, and considerations on Lord's amendments to the Domestic Abuse Bill. In the first story today, we discuss the passing of the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip. As we all know by now, Prince Philip died last Friday, prompting many throughout the country to reflect on his life, his achievements, and his humour. While the Prime Minister made a statement last Friday, many other MPs want to have their voices heard too, and to reflect on who Prince Philip was and what he achieved. Opening the show of respect was the Speaker, informing the House that they would be observing a minute's silence. The image of the House, all wearing black in complete silence, was a sharp reminder that while debates may rage and there may be fierce disagreement among members, they are all united and stand as one in paying their respects. Following this minute's silence, the Speaker paid his respects to Prince Philip.
He was the longest-serving consort in history and the oldest partner of a serving monarch. He never let the Queen down. His passing also marks the end of an era as one of the last surviving heroes of the Second World War, serving as an officer in the Royal Navy with distinction and heavily decorated for his bravery and long service. He visited troops in Iraq and travelled with the Queen throughout the Commonwealth and overseas territories, and only stepped down from official royal duties at the age of 96.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson was next up to pay his respects.
Mr. Speaker, it is fitting that on Saturday His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh will be conveyed to his final resting place in a Land Rover which Prince Philip designed himself with a long wheelbase and capacious rear cabin, because that vehicle's unique and idiosyncratic silhouette reminds the world that he was above all a practical man who could take something very traditional, whether a machine or indeed a great national institution, and find a way by his own ingenuity to improve it, to adapt it for the 20th and the 21st century. And it is also true, Mr. Speaker, that amongst his more parliamentary expressions, he commented adversely on the French concept of breakfast. He told a British student in Papua New Guinea that he was lucky not to be eaten, and the people of the Cayman Islands that they were descended from pirates, and that he would like to go to Russia, except that, as he put it, the bastards murdered half my family. But, Mr. Speaker, the world did not hold it against him. On the contrary, they overwhelmingly understood that he was trying to break the ice, to get things moving, to get people laughing, and to forget their nerves.
Following this, the leader of the opposition, Keir Starmer, paid his respects, highlighting the length of his service to the country.
The life of Prince Philip was extraordinary, lived in a century on fast forward, a time that saw World War, a Cold War, the fall of empire, 20 prime ministers, the invention of the television, the internet. Throughout that time, the monarchy has been the one institution for which the faith of the British people has never faltered. And as we've seen once again in recent days, the royal family has a connection with the British people that runs as deep today as it did when Philip Mountbatten married the then Princess Elizabeth in 1947.
As we've stated before, our thoughts go out to all of those grieving the loss of Prince Philip. For our second story today, we look at a 10-minute rule motion. This week we saw Labour MP Carolyn Harris submit a motion related to NHS pay. Specifically, she wanted the Secretary of State to produce a report on why NHS pay rises were below 2.1%, as they originally promised, and to make the Secretary of State call a House of Commons motion to approve any reports on NHS pay increases. This comes on the back of the news that NHS workers have been given only a 1% pay rise, despite previous promises that it might be as high as 2.1%. The Prime Minister claimed that due to the coronavirus pandemic, 1% is the most that can be given. This is what the bill's proposer, Ms Harris, had to say on the proposed NHS pay increase.
Nurses and NHS staff were promised at least a 2.1% pay rise, but the government has now retracted that and recommended 1%. The government pretend this is a rise. They're fooling no one. With inflation forecast to reach 1.7% this year, our NHS staff are now set to receive a real-term pay cut. Nurses' pay have been falling in real terms since the Conservatives came to power 11 years ago.
Ms Harris expands on the pay decrease point further, making clear her reservations with ministers' decisions to cut nurses' pay.
For me, the thought of looking a nurse in the eye and telling them that they are worth less this year than they were before the pandemic is outrageously insulting. All of us across this house stood on our doorsteps and clapped for key workers. We all took to social media and thanked NHS staff. So it was just for show? Were the worm wards and platitudes just a tick-box exercise? Or does the Prime Minister and his government, hand on heart, truly believe a rule-breaking, unapologetic aid is worth considerably more than the hundreds of thousands of NHS staff?
Getting back onto the topic of the bill itself, Ms Harris explains exactly what the bill will do and how it will affect the pay of NHS nurses.
With this bill, the government will be required to present their recommendations for anything below the already approved minimum increase of 2.1 and seek agreement from the House of any new proposals.
So what usually happens following a proposal is that an audible vote is called. Bills usually only get ayes at this point, because the government know that they can simply defeat the bill in the future, either by voting it down or not giving it any time, and thus leaving it to get written off at the end of the parliamentary schedule. Anyway, something rather odd happened this time though. As the following clip shows, the audible vote didn't simply sail through like normal.
As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The country no.
No! No! No!
So, as you just saw, one member was very vocal about their opposition to the bill. It's not clear who this MP was, but it ultimately resulted in a division being called. The result of the vote was as follows.
Ayes to the right, 222. The noes to the left, 0.
So, despite one member forcing the vote to a division by yelling no, not a single member presented themselves in the no lobby. On the contrary, 222 MPs presented themselves in the aye lobby, mainly Labour MPs. It should be noted that no member of the Conservative Party voted on this motion at all. Ultimately then, we'll have to see how the government deals with this bill going forward. In the final story today, we stay in the House of Commons, but first we have to set the scene, both to explain the bill itself and the specific stage of the parliamentary process it's at. The Domestic Abuse Bill was introduced to the Commons way back in March last year, with the bill, among other things, setting out for the first time a statutory definition of domestic abuse, the introduction of a new domestic abuse protection notice, greater protection for victims during the judicial process, as well as the appointment of a new domestic abuse commissioner. So far, so good. Over the last year and a bit, the bill has been making its way through the House of Commons and subsequently the House of Lords, who completed the third reading of the bill towards the tail end of March this year. The issue being that the Lords added some of their own amendments, leading to the start of ping-pong, with the bill now moving between the Commons and Lords until an agreement is reached over the contents of the bill. So, beginning on Thursday, the Commons began considering the Lords' amendments, all 86 of them. Just some of the amendments the Lords put forward include the prohibition of perpetrators or alleged perpetrators from cross-examining their victims on the stand, a defence of victims of domestic abuse who commit a crime while being compelled by their abuser, and a provision to make threatening to disclose private sexual material a crime. It was up to Victoria Atkins, the government minister for safeguarding, to open up the debate.
We support the vast majority of the 86 amendments that the Lords have sent to us. There are 12 sets with which we do not agree, and I will deal with those in due course. But I would like to take a moment to reflect on the events of recent weeks and the concerns, the experiences, and indeed the fears expressed by women and girls across the country. This bill will help millions of women and girls. These clauses apply to all relationships and all encounters of a sexual nature, from a Tinder hookup to a marriage of many decades.
In regards to the cross-examination amendments, the minister highlighted how the judiciary should not form another avenue for abuse.
In short, these amendments more closely align the position in the civil courts to those in the family courts, so that victims of domestic abuse have the benefit of automatic eligibility for special measures to enable them to give their best evidence and to ensure they are protected from being cross-examined in person by their abuser.
In light of the horrific news arising from the Sarah Everard case, members from across the House stressed the critical importance of working to make the bill the best it can be, something stressed emotionally by Jess Phillips, the Shadow Minister for Domestic Violence and Safeguarding.
Following the death of Sarah Everard, heartbreak, fear and anger ripped through the country, a response to the endemic violence that women and girls suffer. People felt it in their bones. Responding to such an outpouring of grief is our job. It is our duty and a privilege as parliamentarians to take that emotion, that fear, that rage, that passion and injustice and turn it into policy and law. It is our job to do something meaningful. And the question for the House today, as we consider the amendments voted into the bill by the other place in the heat of those moments, is who do we decide to save?
In a similar vein, the former Prime Minister and Home Secretary Theresa May added her general support.
Because this is a really important bill and it will save lives and it will protect people who, sadly, too many people, day to day, are being abused by their partners, by those they are living with, and in horrific and terrible ways.
May also stressed the need to get the bill on the statute book, in light of the fact that a new parliamentary session will commence on the 11th of May, and unless the bill is carried over, all progress made will be lost.
We are running out of time. I know we can ping-pong and we can carry on until we actually get through it, but I think were we to run out of time and were it not to get on the statute book, that would be the biggest betrayal of victims.
It goes without saying that we stand alongside those who have been victims of domestic abuse and sincerely hope that this bill does become law. If you want to be updated with what happens in Parliament next week, then be sure to subscribe to the channel. Or if you prefer to listen to the weekly update, then subscribe to the Daily Briefing podcast feed, where you'll find a daily summary of the week's news and every Saturday, This Week in Parliament.